As Christmas neared, a time that usually fills me with joy, I found myself in a tough situation. Life hasn't been kind to me, despite my efforts to be kind to others. Some might say, "Welcome to the club, my friend," but the situation has become truly depressing. I used to think that infidelity was mostly a guy thing, but now I see that women are capable of it too. I don't want to make broad generalizations, but I'm speaking from my own experience. The situation unfolded in a way that made it seem like my girlfriend didn't like him at all. But after installing a hidden camera, the truth became clear. It became obvious that when I went to work, he secretly entered my apartment and got involved with my girlfriend. This guy used to live next door but got arrested and needed a place to stay for a few weeks. I often wondered why he was always hanging around us. After I kicked him out, he started showing up in places we were, and I wondered who was telling him our whereabouts. It felt like he had some kind of GPS tracker and was constantly watching us. But eventually, the truth came out. It happened one morning when I finished my shower and was getting ready for work. My girlfriend was also showering. Suddenly, her phone got a text message notification. In a normal situation, I wouldn't have paid much attention, but my girlfriend had a new phone, and the ringtone was unfamiliar. I checked the sender, and it was Patrick, my former roommate who had just been released from prison. We became friends in high school when we both lived in Queens. We had lots of shared memories and experiences. Patrick lived with me for a few months before his prison time, but things changed when my girlfriend moved in. After he got out, he came back and stayed with us for 2 more months. Unfortunately, we had a falling out and I asked him to leave. Initially, he was only supposed to stay for 2 weeks, but it turned into 2 months. Paying almost $2,000 for a small 2-bedroom apartment in New York was already hard. The lack of personal space made it tough to communicate with my girlfriend because he was on the couch in the living room. In January, we planned to sign a new lease and move to a better, more expensive apartment. Next month, my girlfriend could welcome her family and friends without any embarrassment. It's important to note that Patrick and my girlfriend didn't have a strong relationship. She supported me when I asked him to leave. They met recently when I let him stay with us temporarily. So I was surprised when I saw he was texting her that morning. I didn't even know they were texting. A notification popped up on my phone screen showing their conversation. My name is Caleb, and my girlfriend and I knew a Patrick, and she didn't know any other person with that name. Plus, her friend Patrick, whom I didn't know about, asking about another Caleb seemed like a big coincidence. I realized she was actually talking to my previous neighbor, whom I kicked out 2 weeks ago due to his long stay. I couldn't imagine a connection between my girlfriend and Patrick, especially since she supported my decision to cut him out of our lives. But the feeling of unease lingered, suggesting something was wrong. The idea of romance never crossed my mind. Maybe they went out together for a smoke or some other activity. He had potential for other things, but was fixated on becoming a rapper and spending money on studio time. He always went back to street dealing in illegal substances when he lost his job. But even there, he was unsuccessful, getting caught and serving short prison terms. This cycle repeated endlessly. Let me paint a picture for you. I grew up in a mostly disadvantaged part of Queens, where my parents are still happily married. I faced financial struggles as a child, but I was never hungry. I'm grateful to have grown up in a diverse community that exposed me to various cultures. Most of my friends during my formative years were of African descent. I didn't think I'd have a relationship with someone from a different race, as all my previous girlfriends were African American. But fate had other plans. It all started about 1.5 years ago when I met my current girlfriend while working as a courier. We exchanged witty remarks, and I jokingly asked her out, fully expecting a rejection. I became a delivery driver, which eventually led to our relationship. She's a fantastic young professional in her early 20s, with a beautiful figure that highlights her beauty. When we first met, she was living in a fancy neighborhood with a neighbor. I'm a simple person who doesn't need much in life, just enough money to cover rent and a loyal girlfriend who won't cheat on me while I work hard. At the beginning, I thought I had found it all in my current girlfriend, and I cherished the time we spent together. After 7 months of dating, I fully trusted her. It felt like we could build a stable future together, which meant no more splurging on expensive dates, bars, and clubs. At the time, I had a roommate named Patrick, but the lease was in my name only. Patrick had poor credit and no rental history, so he couldn't be on the lease. My lease ended after 8 months, and my girlfriend's agreement was linked to her neighbor's. We both agreed to find new, better housing in about 4 months when her lease was up. It was our next step in our plans as a couple. She wanted to live in the East Village or Lower East Side, similar to her current area. I lived in Washington Heights, which she didn't fancy. Luckily, her job was in the East Village, so it matched her desire to be near work. My delivery job didn't tie me to a specific location, but I had to consider the apartment my partner wanted, even though it was $1,500 more than my current one. A one-bedroom was about $3,500. The plan was for her to temporarily move in with me and my neighbor after her lease ended. After my lease ended, we'd move to the apartment she liked. Patrick had dreamed of music fame since he was 16, but it hadn't happened yet. Despite pouring money into studio time, his music remained largely unheard, and he was stuck in a frustrating cycle. He avoided steady jobs, opting for buying and selling sweeties. This led to failed sweetie tests and job losses, causing delays in rent payments. Regrettably, I allowed him to move in, which I now regret. After he was fired, he resorted to selling sweeties on the streets to get by, often getting arrested. This pattern had been going on since he was 16, and I felt foolish for letting him get so close to me. Predictably, 4 months before the lease ended, he was arrested and went to jail. I was the only one on the lease, so I was left with the rent. Despite his multiple arrests, I still let him stay with me. Unfortunately, he continued living in prison. I hoped he'd change and find a job like mine, but he was determined to make it in the music industry. In short, as soon as my girlfriend's lease ended, she moved in with me, and we started a new chapter as a couple. We lived together for a while, but our peaceful life was disrupted when, a month later, Patrick got an early release from prison. Surprisingly, when Patrick returned, his stuff was gone from our shared apartment. Patrick had nowhere to go and asked to stay with me for 2 weeks until he sorted things out and moved in with relatives. Given our limited space, I hesitated. I told him our 2-bedroom apartment was already small for me and my girlfriend, and adding another person would make it worse. But after talking to my girlfriend, we agreed. She hadn't met Patrick before, and her knowledge of him was limited to what I had shared. Surprisingly, he moved in that same day. I made it clear that my girlfriend's consent was based on him staying for just 2 weeks. He agreed, promising to be inconspicuous. Surprisingly, within a week, he adapted to being a courteous couch surfer, not intruding into our space and returning when we were getting ready for bed. Although we seldom saw him, we knew he was there and appreciated his efforts to keep his stuff tidy. So we didn't even notice the first 2 weeks passing. But in the 3rd and 4th weeks, I occasionally returned home late from work to find him watching TV with my girlfriend. While there was nothing wrong with it, I found it odd. He knew when I would be late and timed his arrivals conveniently. At first, I thought he had a friendly relationship with my girlfriend, but they hardly talked when I was around. Despite our efforts to keep things clean, our tiny space still felt cramped and suffocating. As the 5th week approached, I became increasingly concerned that Patrick had extended his stay beyond the promised 2 weeks. I felt for my girlfriend and reassured her that he would leave as promised. One evening, while lying in bed, I decided to address the situation with her. I wanted to apologize on Patrick's behalf and ease the tension in the air. Although Patrick hadn't caused any issues between us, the cramped living conditions appeared to impact our closeness relationship. It had been 4 weeks since we were last closeness, and I felt the need to address this. I wanted to talk to my girlfriend about Patrick overstaying his initial 2-week promise. I expected her to support me or at least respond, but she simply turned away and went to bed as if I was in her way. Upon reflection, I remembered that for the first 3 days after Patrick moved in, our bed life was normal. However, on the 4th day, she began refusing bed life. Considering that my girlfriend was usually active in those moments, I thought her behavior might be due to feeling uncomfortable. During the last 3 days, while Patrick was staying with us, she became noticeably vocal during closeness moments, even though she knew he was in the living room. I was struck by the fact that for the first 3 days after he arrived, our bed life was unusually loud, almost like she was doing it on purpose. Oddly enough, starting from the 4th day, it significantly boosted my self-esteem. My girlfriend frequently rejected any bed life, often using Patrick's presence as an excuse. It was strange since she hadn't been so cautious in the first 3 days. Despite Patrick being in the living room, I didn't think much of it. But after 6 weeks, I expressed my dissatisfaction to Patrick, telling him his stay was over. It bothered me that my girlfriend continued to deny bed life because of him. I noticed his lingering presence, and it seemed like a deliberate form of retaliation. Almost 2 months had passed, and she still used the excuse that we had a guest in our apartment. I reminded Patrick he had promised to leave a month ago, but he craftily shifted the blame to other issues and convinced me to let him stay another week. Moreover, I recalled several instances of both Patrick and my girlfriend being absent for extended periods at the same time, and it made me uneasy. There was one incident when I decided to come home early from work due to feeling unwell. My girlfriend usually returned home at 5:30 p.m., so I headed to the apartment door to unlock it. Suddenly, I heard commotion inside the apartment, and I feared a break-in since neither Patrick nor my girlfriend were usually home at that time. Rushing inside, I saw the TV on. Patrick pretended to be engrossed in it, but his behavior was unusual and uncomfortable, evident to any observer. Meanwhile, the sound of running water indicated my girlfriend was in the shower. This strange situation raised suspicions, suggesting something fishy was going on between them. Although I lacked concrete evidence, their presence in the apartment at that time was enough to trigger doubt. Plus, I was sure my girlfriend wasn't the type to engage in such behavior. To address the situation, I asked my girlfriend about her early return home. Her response was that she took a half-day off from work. Their explanation didn't convince me, and I was dissatisfied due to my poor health that day. I didn't delve into the topic as thoroughly as I should have, but I couldn't shake the suspicion of a connection between them. The next day, my girlfriend unexpectedly brought up the topic of my conversation with Patrick about him moving out. To my surprise, she acted as an intermediary for him, suggesting we extend the deadline for another week or more and not pressure him, considering that we were leaving the apartment in January. I found it odd that he used her as an intermediary to prolong his stay with us. He had initially promised just 2 weeks, and I believed it was important for him to keep his word. I had already endured a considerable amount of time without my usual surroundings and bed life, and now she was suddenly taking his side. This situation greatly upset me, and ultimately, our argument about it didn't last long. Thankfully, she eventually admitted I was right. At times, it had felt like I was on my own in my stance, and I had worried that if we let him, he would become a permanent freeloader who constantly crashed on the couch, avoiding his rent obligations. I sometimes wished he were back in prison. He had a knack for finding trouble in record time, and he had a tendency to put himself there. This all happened in November, the same week when we were together in search of the perfect wedding ring. It was a well-planned event that we'd been preparing for several weeks. Involving her in the ring selection was meant to ensure her absolute delight and pride in wearing it for the rest of her life. At least, that was the plan. We had been discussing the idea of getting married even before she moved in with me, and we had been meticulously planning it for weeks leading up to this moment. Our grand plan involved signing a lease for a new apartment in December. I had decided to propose on Valentine's Day in January, knowing her love for romantic gestures. On the evening we went to get wedding rings, we finally had a chance to be closeness after a 7-week hiatus. It was a special reward for buying the rings and a gentle reminder of the closeness we had missed due to the guest in the living room. The following week only intensified my longing for the bond we shared. I borrowed $4,500 from my savings, which totaled $401,000, to buy the engagement ring she wanted. I kept it hidden in a place where she wouldn't accidentally find it to surprise her on Valentine's Day. But the very next day, my girlfriend reminded me that it had been almost 2 months since Patrick started living with us, and this revelation caught me off guard. In the evening, I met with Patrick and firmly told him he had only 1 day to find another place to live, or I'd have to remove his things myself. He claimed he had nowhere to go, which infuriated me. I explained to him that it was not my problem. At that moment, my girlfriend emerged from the bedroom and our voices grew louder. I strongly urged Patrick to stop relying on me and find a place to live, or turn to his family for help. It was clear that his relatives didn't want him around due to his unreliability. Even his acquaintances in our social circle, who, as it turned out, were of African descent, didn't want to accept him. The confrontation escalated, nearly turning physical. I warned him that if he didn't leave my apartment that night, there would be consequences. I decided to contact the authorities to ensure they would handle this situation properly by putting him behind bars. I expressed my disappointment, making it clear that his lack of gratitude prevented me from helping him. He left that evening, but returned the next morning to pick up his things. By the end of November, It was clear that he was out of my life for good. There were rumors that he found shelter in a run-down house about 2 miles away from me, which wasn't surprising given the lack of support from his acquaintances. But it puzzled me that he didn't seek refuge with his relatives, instead of living in a place that could lead him back to prison. I couldn't fathom his reasoning. I often wondered why he insisted on staying in the area, despite the lack of job opportunities and the high costs of maintaining the studio for his unsuccessful music career. It was in the first week of December that I discovered why he was so determined to stay. I was at a bar with my girlfriend when I saw him discreetly leaving the room. His presence there struck me as odd. This scenario repeated several times in different places, and I later found out my girlfriend had been exchanging text messages with him. This discovery made me wonder if he was tracking our location through GPS, as he often showed up in places where we were trying to avoid him. Trying to make sense of this unsettling situation, I mentioned it to my girlfriend in a joking manner. To my surprise, she admitted that she found his behavior disturbing and creepy as well. I learned that she had given him our location, allowing them to meet secretly and have closeness relations in my car while I waited inside an establishment, completely unaware of her actions. This incident occurred during our second visit to her parents in upstate New York. The first visit had been unpleasant due to her father's disapproval of me. My girlfriend informed me that he preferred her to marry a man with a higher education, not someone like me. While his words were different, his intentions were clear. I realized that was the message he wanted to convey. Her father, an arrogant and irritable college professor, believed he was superior to me. He saw himself as an intellectual giant. He constantly lectured me and treated me as a suspect. I disliked him, and it was evident that he thought his daughter deserved someone better. Despite my girlfriend's efforts to make her father accept me, it became clear that we wouldn't see eye to eye. She wanted us to visit her parents' home before Christmas, so they could get to know me before we celebrated the holidays together. I tried to be polite to her parents, but they proved quite challenging. They expressed a desire to visit my girlfriend and see where she lived now, but she insisted they wait until we moved to a nicer apartment in the East Village or Lower East Side. She was afraid that if they saw the condition of our neighborhood and apartment, they would be disappointed. We were planning to sign a lease for a new apartment in 2 weeks, just a few days before Christmas. The following week, I found a notification from Patrick on my girlfriend's newly purchased phone. Without knowing the nature of their communication, I saved a record of the message. My main feeling was confusion rather than suspicion, as I had never seen my girlfriend as someone who would betray my trust. As she finished her shower, I wanted to capture the text message as proof. While driving to work, my thoughts were preoccupied with the dynamics of the relationship between my girlfriend and Patrick. I had many questions about his messages, particularly the ones about my work schedule, which raised suspicions about a possible connection between them. I recalled how she used to be vocally expressive during our closeness moments while Patrick lived in my apartment. I couldn't help but think about how she chose her outfits when Patrick was around. The lack of bed life, which she attributed to Patrick's presence, also weighed on my mind. I remembered numerous instances when I unexpectedly returned home to find both of them in the house. I thought about his sudden appearances in various places and her unexplained disappearances for short periods of time. Gradually, everything began to make sense, and my suspicions of their affair intensified even before my work shift ended. Throughout the day, I wrestled with my emotions of worthlessness, anger, and confusion. I desperately hoped that my conclusions were wrong, as my life revolved around this woman. Without her, I might have moved to Florida by now. A friend in Florida had made me a tempting offer 3 months ago, offering $500 a day after taxes for transporting cars in a certain region of the United States. However, as my relationship with my girlfriend deepened, I understood her reluctance to leave New York and her family. I made the resolute decision to stay in my apartment. On the same day I received a text notification, I decided to verify my suspicions. To do that, I chose to buy a pair of high-quality hidden video cameras with excellent resolution. The plan was to discreetly install them in my bedroom and living room to remotely monitor the situation through Wi-Fi and receive real-time updates on my phone. Capitalizing on the evening while she slept soundly, I expertly placed the cameras in their designated spots. With great care, I connected them to the Wi-Fi network, ensuring uninterrupted communication with my mobile device. Before heading to work the next morning, I carefully checked the cameras, ensuring they remained hidden and operated optimally. I strategically concealed the cameras in various spots and then left with my phone, ensuring it was synchronized. Typically, my girlfriend and I had different work schedules. She left for work at 7 in the morning and I left at 5, so I expected several days would pass before the cameras recorded any significant events. However, I was shocked by the reality. Just half an hour after I left the apartment, the camera's motion sensor went off like crazy. At that moment, I was leaving the subway. I stood in the middle of the station, trying to comprehend the shocking scene unfolding on my phone. Initially, I thought it was my girlfriend who had triggered the motion sensor, but when I looked at my phone, I saw Patrick's presence on the screen. To my bewilderment, he was already in my apartment, passionately kissing my girlfriend. In the bustling living room, commuters hurried by, paying no attention to the heartbreaking scene I was witnessing, and I stood there in complete bewilderment. How could this happen? Then it dawned on me that Patrick must have been hiding nearby, patiently waiting for me to leave for work. My girlfriend was standing there completely naked, draped only in a white towel over her head. I was at a loss, unable to comprehend the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. As I weaved through the crowd, my legs grew weaker, and eventually, I had to find a seat at the nearest station. To my amazement, they began engaging in closeness acts right on the couch in my living room. I was both surprised and captivated by their ease and comfort. It was evident that this affair had been ongoing for a long time, all unbeknownst to me. The realization that I was running late for work suddenly hit me, yet I felt a strange indifference. It seemed that at that moment, my life had lost all meaning. Everything I once treasured was shattered, and I felt utterly defeated. The rage inside me reached a boiling point, and I was overwhelmed by an irresistible desire to seek revenge against these two individuals. While watching the camera recording, my supervisor suddenly called, causing the recording to pause. I was annoyed by his interruption, but he questioned my lateness and warned of potential consequences if I didn't arrive within 30 minutes. This skepticism and anger led me to impulsively quit my job, abruptly ending the conversation. When my supervisor attempted to contact me again, I intentionally ignored his call until the subway neared its destination. By then, I realized they had already finished their actions, and I thought with regret about the time it would take me to get back home. I couldn't believe their audacity. As the subway train continued its journey, I couldn't shake the feelings of betrayal and regret washing over me. My girlfriend, whom I trusted and loved, had deceived me in the most terrible way. The thought that she had gone to work as usual that morning filled me with a bitter mix of anger and disappointment. It was a stark reminder of my own ignorance, failing to see the truth that was unfolding right before my eyes. Minutes passed, and the adrenaline that had fueled my impulsive job resignation gradually dissipated. It was replaced by a wave of regret and self-doubt. I couldn't help but chastise myself for making such a hasty decision. I suddenly realized how important my job was to me. Deep down, I understood that it would be futile to seek my old position back. The damage had been done, and it seemed too late to salvage what I had lost. The weight of my mistake pressed heavily on me during that solitary subway ride. Before this incident, I had always viewed my girlfriend as loyal and devoted. The idea that she might betray me had never crossed my mind, and now I had to confront the painful truth that she had been having an affair with a man I considered my friend. Disbelief and heartache intertwined, making that subway ride the saddest of my life. I had always shown kindness to these people, repeatedly offering my assistance, even when his family had rejected him. I had shown understanding, but in return, my girlfriend and friend treated me cruelly. How could I trust a woman who had an affair with my friend? The idea of proposing to her on Valentine's Day, as I returned to my apartment, seemed unthinkable. Early in the morning, around 8 a.m., I removed my work clothes and collapsed on the bed, crying like a helpless child. It felt as though all my achievements had been wiped away, and I was essentially starting from scratch. I found myself in a tough spot. I had lost my job and my girlfriend, and now I was uncertain about what to do when the lease on my apartment expired. Moving in with my ex-girlfriend wasn't an option due to our breakup, and without a higher-paying job, I wouldn't be able to afford my apartment in 2 months. Finding another job was challenging, especially with so many candidates vying for the same positions. I had already informed my landlord about my intention to move out, and now I was in a state of limbo. Although I briefly considered reaching out to my former employer in the hopes of being rehired, I was pretty sure I had already been fired. Even if I were to apologize, it seemed unlikely that it would salvage the situation with the abundance of candidates interested in the job. Thankfully, Florida offered a glimmer of hope. In the midst of my despair, I decided to change my circumstances and turned to a friend who, along with his wife, ran a car transportation company in Florida. Although he had previously offered me a driver's position, I had declined due to my girlfriend's reluctance to leave New York. However, now, desperate for a fresh start, I reached out to my friend. Unfortunately, he didn't answer my call, prompting me to contact his wife, who played a significant role in the business. She managed the company's website, handled accounts receivable, and took phone calls when her husband was on the road. She informed me that there was still an open position and asked if I could come to Florida. I agreed and said I could visit the next day to inspect the place. As a result, I planned to book a ticket to Florida. Currently, I had $3,500 in my bank account, and by returning the engagement ring today, I would receive a $4,500 compensation, giving me a total of $8,000. While contemplating my future, I began to feel a sense of optimism. The idea of leaving without informing my ex-girlfriend was becoming increasingly appealing. I wondered if anyone could truly understand my dire situation. I received strong recommendations to follow this path, with the main advice being to leave, endure the shocks, relinquish the desire for revenge, and disappear from her life completely. I had pondered this idea for a while, but it initially seemed too simplistic to me. My anger towards both her and her lover fueled my desire for revenge. Yet in the end, I recognized the most crucial aspect of this plan: ending it all and severing all ties with her, never to meet or communicate with her again. My vanishing act was tied to her repeated attempts to contact me, and I longed for it all to be over, wanting to see her reaction personally. Surprisingly, the guys involved also longed for closure. I spent the entire day alone in my apartment, providing ample time to contemplate the actions of both my girlfriend and the former friend who had turned out to be my roommate. As a result, I concluded that the most appropriate retaliation would be to keep all information about my intentions to myself and reveal the news to her at the very last moment when she least expected it. When I returned home that evening, I could barely contain the urge to engage in an argument with her. In my eyes, she appeared malicious, vile, and wicked. I couldn't fathom her motives for such a betrayal. Despite losing all affection and desire for her, I decided to maintain a facade of indifference, pretending that I was unaware of anything. That night, as we lay together, restless thoughts consumed my mind. What could have driven her to such actions against a man she had professed her love for? It occurred to me that perhaps this affair had started only a week after his arrival, and I wondered if it served as a means to humiliate and disgrace me. She may have been intrigued by being with a man of a different race, like indulging in a forbidden fruit or conducting an experiment. I couldn't think of any other reason for her actions. Before going to bed, I informed her that I had to go on a 4-day business trip to Florida as required by my company. I suggested she sign an apartment rental agreement in my absence, assuring her that I would sign an addendum when I returned. The leasing company had already checked our credit, and our combined income was sufficient for the housing. She agreed to the plan. I booked a flight to Florida, which turned out to be the most expensive ticket I'd ever purchased. However, despite the cost, it was worth it because I couldn't stand living in the same apartment with my girlfriend any longer. The thought of her infidelity in my own bed while I was at work disgusted me. It was unnerving to realize that my girlfriend was most interested in the timing of my flight, presumably to inform her lover of the ideal time for their rendezvous. I couldn't help but wonder how long she intended to continue this affair. Having once proposed to her, I contemplated the future. Would our story continue in our new apartment? Would it proceed after marriage and the formation of a family? These thoughts made me grateful that I wouldn't be around for those significant moments. Feeling despondent, I decided to create some distance from her the next morning. I told her that I had to leave early, even though I had rearranged the camera the day before. To capture a better view of our living room and bedroom, I ensured that I saved a video recording of their activities on a portable hard drive. It was almost predictable. As soon as I left the apartment, Patrick, her partner in the affair, wasted no time entering. Their actions fell into a routine. Fortunately, a strategically placed hidden camera managed to capture their facial expressions, her loud and obnoxious screams, and even their closeness moments. What surprised me most was their complete disregard for protection. It was thoughtless of her to put my health at such risk. Besides, Patrick had recently been released from prison, and I couldn't help but wonder about the diseases he might have contracted there. In my unstable life situation, I was concerned about potential health risks, especially regarding venereal diseases. With this in mind, I mentally noted that I would definitely get tested upon arriving in Florida. Just before boarding the flight, I managed to get in touch with my friend, who explained the driver job opportunity in detail. Luckily, I already had a CDL license, so I only needed additional training to upgrade my skills. While it won't be easy to drive across the entire country, I genuinely enjoy being behind the wheel, and the compensation is nearly 3 times what I used to earn. Plus, I dream of owning a spacious house in Florida with a large backyard, a far cry from New York, where most of my income goes into renting. Such real estate won't come cheap. Even though I'm unsure about the exact date of my trip, I have enough time to contemplate my next steps. Maybe I should heed my friend's father's advice and return to school once I've saved up enough for tuition. Right now, everything feels uncertain and unresolved. I'm overwhelmed with emotions, making it hard to make a rational decision. I have video recordings of those 2 days when something unexpected occurred, and I've saved these recordings on my portable hard drive. The hidden camera I used activates when there's movement, meaning it only records when there's motion detected. The camera's memory was sufficient to keep recording until I returned from my 4-day trip to Florida. Upon arriving in Florida in the evening, I discovered that my friend had left for deliveries and decided to take a cab to his house. To my surprise, his wife was home. My friend and his family live in a magnificent Florida residence, and seeing their prosperity filled me with joy. We grew up together in Queens, so their success felt even more remarkable. Comparing their grand home to my small New York apartment couldn't help but seem comical. Nevertheless, I felt optimistic about embarking on this new chapter of my life in this place. During our conversation, my friend expressed strong disapproval of Patrick, whom he had warned me to stay away from many years ago. Unfortunately, I didn't heed his advice. Ironically, I now find myself grateful to Patrick for revealing my girlfriend's true nature. If it hadn't been for him, someone else might have uncovered her deception. Who's to say? It could have been another person of African descent. During my visit to my friend's house in Florida, I decided to review the recordings from my camera in the evening. To my complete shock, I saw Patrick in my home, eating my food, occupying my bed, and engaging in closeness activities with my girlfriend on the same bed. The depth of this betrayal became unbearable. Initially, I had planned to address it with her after she moved to a new apartment, but witnessing this blatant lack of respect in my own bed pushed me over the edge. Yet, I realized that taking matters into my own hands would lead to negative consequences. The thought of seeking revenge crossed my mind, but I quickly recognized the potential fallout, such as ending up in prison for a significant portion of my life. Instead, the next day, I decided to contact her father and give him the keys to my apartment. My plan was to include videos that showed his daughter engaging in a closeness relationship with a person of another race to provoke a strong emotional reaction. I began making duplicate keys to my apartment the next morning. I saved and transferred the recording of their closeness encounter to a USB drive. On the same day, I sent it to her father using an express delivery service. Initially, I had considered contacting her father directly, but I lacked his contact information. Then I searched for her on the college's website, but only found the number to his office. I persistently called his office multiple times until he finally answered. He recognized me, and I took the opportunity to reveal the truth about his daughter. I explained that she had asked me to accompany her on a trip to visit relatives, emphasizing that we weren't romantically involved, just friends with benefits. I was one of her many lovers, the person she lived with and dealt in illegal substances. I informed him that, as a gesture of goodwill, I had made copies of her apartment keys and suggested he visit her at 8 p.m., the optimal time. I intentionally didn't mention the presence of video recordings, unsure of how to explain that aspect. After our phone conversation, he remained silent. I assumed he might be shocked by the unexpected information I had shared, and was awaiting the inevitable consequences. Alternatively, he could suspect it was a hoax. Although I strongly doubted it, perhaps it was due to the extensive information I provided. I was sure that upon receiving the package, he would believe me, though I wasn't certain if everything would go according to plan. While going about my own business, I took the opportunity to familiarize myself with the upcoming living arrangements. My friend's wife kindly briefed me on how their business operated, essentially bringing me up to speed. Late in the afternoon, my friend returned, and his family and I went out for dinner. To avoid drawing attention to my own situation, I turned off the camera notifications. However, around 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, something suddenly struck me. I decided to discreetly check the camera while dining with my friend and his family. Given the sensitive nature of this story, I didn't immediately share it with my friend. Stepping out of the restaurant, I quickly examined my phone and was pleasantly surprised that this was the moment I had been anticipating for my revenge against my unfaithful partner. To my amazement, her father unexpectedly arrived at my apartment, accompanied by 3 young men around 25 years old. Assuming these were either his sons or their friends, I mentally replayed the scenario. They seemed caught off guard. When they entered the living room, my ex-girlfriend and her lover were engrossed in watching TV. But their peaceful moment was shattered when her father and several men entered the room. Patrick, in a t-shirt, appeared bewildered, and my ex-girlfriend hurriedly attempted to cover herself, remaining in her underwear. Her father began berating her, expressing his disappointment with her lies about her boyfriend. In that tense moment, it seemed to me that I foolishly hoped for a different outcome, perhaps wishing that the situation could be resolved without resorting to physical measures. However, my ex-girlfriend didn't get the chance to express her thoughts. Her father categorically prevented her from doing so, showering Patrick with degrading insults, some of which were too offensive to repeat. I observed the bewildered look on her face as her father accused her of betraying her family and demanded an explanation for her actions. Her reaction was truly priceless. She appeared completely confounded, not knowing where to begin. I couldn't help but find the situation amusing, and her father's frustrated, angry, and arrogant demeanor was incredibly satisfying to witness. It was hard to bear seeing a beloved child entangled in something he despised. Her father relentlessly scolded her, hurling degrading insults at Patrick, and seemed ready for a confrontation. With 3 men accompanying him, it was clear he anticipated Patrick's involvement. It's no wonder he came prepared for any outcome. However, at the first opportunity, Patrick hastily retreated, leaving my ex-girlfriend alone. Her father continued his verbal onslaught, nearly disowning her, but not severing family ties. The most remarkable part is that I recorded the entire incident on video. After her father's departure, she was left in a state of shock and isolation. Overwhelmed with emotion, she called me with tears in her eyes, anxiously asking when I would return. Little did she know that I had orchestrated this entire scenario, forever rupturing the bond between father and daughter. Their relationship would never be the same, and she had only me to blame for these irreversible changes. During our phone conversation, she expressed a desire to confess something, but couldn't discuss it over the phone. I advised her to wait until my return home for a face-to-face conversation. I tried to console her, urging her to stop crying and assuring her that I would be back in 2 days, ready to listen to her problems. To my surprise, the next morning, she didn't invite Patrick for a closeness meeting. It seemed the fun had suddenly ended. As I later learned, she had no way to contact me. Despite this, I couldn't help but grin because she had brought this situation upon herself. Now, she'd have to face the consequences of her actions. Later that day, I received the results of an STD test, which came back negative. It was on the day I was supposed to fly back to New York that she finally discovered I was the one responsible for unveiling the truth. Presumably, her mother had informed her about the situation. As I headed to the airport, she called me and admitted to her infidelity. I realized she had pieced it all together. She mentioned that I had gone to extreme lengths, secretly recording and destroying her family, which she considered unnecessary. I explained how she had wrecked my life, especially as I was on the brink of getting married. She somehow managed to find 2 hidden recording devices and threatened me with a lawsuit. Upon my return to New York, I decided to consult with my lawyer to determine if she had a valid claim. It remains uncertain whether she genuinely has one as an excuse for her unfaithfulness. She simply attributed it to a desire for bed life, indicating that Patrick didn't matter to her at all. The way she spoke suggested an attempt to downplay the seriousness of the situation. It seemed as if she expected me to just move on. I made it clear that our relationship was over, everything between us had ended, and my intention was to return to New York, collect my belongings, and then relocate to Florida. In response, she threatened legal action for invasion of privacy and creating adult content out of revenge. I stood my ground and told her to go to hell. The only regret I have is that I didn't give her a chance to explain herself. I'm curious to know how her relationship with Patrick began. From what I gather, it probably started about a week after he moved in. It would be intriguing to hear the story from her perspective. I now reside in Florida, where I work in car transportation across the southern regions of the country, occasionally making stops in the north. The latest news about my ex-girlfriend reveals that she has finally found a new roommate. Her relationship with her father has completely disintegrated since he wants nothing to do with her. As for Patrick, his whereabouts are unknown. To be honest, I don't know, nor am I interested in his fate. What matters most is that I've learned that things turned out terribly for my ex-girlfriend. After my revenge and the strained relationship with her family, she suffered from severe stress and developed psoriasis. Her body and face were covered in painful rashes, causing not only discomfort but also a loss of self-esteem. Once a beautiful girl, now she goes unnoticed by men. And I can't find it in me to feel sorry for her, given the pain and suffering she caused me.